but they introduced me to a lawyer because they wanted me to sign contracts. But my parents weren't very supportive of that kind of stuff back then, so that's the main reason why it didn't work out. Um, but they sent me to a lawyer, and the lawyer was mostly in like the music industry. So he connected me to a label at the time called Ministry of Sound. The Ministry of Sound is now a owned by Sony Music BMG, I think.
That's pretty familiar.
Yeah, they were very big. They were like probably the biggest electronic music indie electronic music label in Australia.
Welcome everyone. This is the inaugural sort of podcast episode for we don't know, sort of unnamed right now. We're kind of tossing up between names. We've got B1 Bytes coming in from one end, Kids in Quarter Zips from what was the other one, Kian? From Convictions to Careers or
Or
something?
can,
Yeah.
yeah, can something along those lines. Yeah.
It kind of has some like I don't know, it has some weird criminal undertones, so we didn't really go too forward with that one. But yeah, the name's kind of undecided, but that doesn't hold us back from getting things started. But yeah, look, we're just the whole point of this podcast is just kind of to get to know a bit of the unique people out there, and specifically in Melbourne, to hear about their stories, their passions, and how they're turning these into things they care about, as well as just getting to know everyone a little bit better. Considering again it's lockdown, so we have to do in this strange format. But nonetheless, we still want to hear stories from other people. So I guess joining us here today. Oh, we've got to say intros quickly. Yeah. So if you don't know me already, I'm Ivan. I guess there's not really much to me. I enjoy playing basketball. I guess my conviction to career. I don't know. I did a lot of juggling when I was younger, so maybe that can be something that will become. Well, my mom always told me. She's always like, "So Ivan, like like wherever you end up going, like regardless of whether you want to do computer science or whether you do engineering, I still think you're going to end up in the circus." And I was like, "Mum, like, you got to be kidding me!" But she's like, "No, no, no. You just always been clowning around. Like I would love to see you end up run away into the circus as we always envisioned you to." So I guess that's my conviction to career is running to the circus. But yeah, we've also got Kian here, a prolific reader, as I recently found out, as well as a prolific soccer fan. So that's big. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Kian.
Thanks, Ivan, and thank you for that intro. I don't think I can match it in terms of quality and entertainment, but I'll give it a crack. I'm Kian. You probably haven't met me. I'm a bit new to the B1 landscape. Like Ivan said, I'm a pretty religious football fan, religious Liverpool supporter, that is. I do like to read. I
Same.
like, oh, good man. Good start. Great mind.
Oh,
What can I say?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, love all things Liverpool, business, politics, and controversial. That's me. And what I might do now is introduce to someone who you all probably know, you all probably envy, and you all wish you were in my position talking to. It is the Reb. He's who we will be talking to today. So, Reb, let us know a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Fair enough. Thank you guys. Love it here. B1's a vibe, Just So yeah, I'm Reb. Conviction to career. Maybe that one. I like making things. I think I mentioned that before, but yeah. It doesn't really matter what I make. So it's just whenever I've learned something in life, it's always been with me trying to make something out of it. So like when I learned software, it was mostly not to just get into software and get into a career of sorts. It was to make games. That's how I started when I was like about 10 or 11, something like that. Same thing with music. Picked it up just because I wanted to play and I wanted to make music. And that's how I learned to play. And yeah, especially going through uni, doing my undergrad in like engineering and stuff, that was just because I wanted to be an inventor when I was a kid. So
Mm, mm.
that probably sums me up in a nutshell. I just like making things, and whenever I'm doing something, it's probably or like learning something, it's probably with me wanting to make something in mind.
I think it's definitely very interesting that you mention, inventing kind of like, pushing your dream, because that's something that I had as well. Like as a kid, I loved the idea of wanting to be an inventor, but I didn't think that was an actual career, so I didn't pursue it. But there were moments along, my childhood. I can recall one specifically. We had like this really early sort of science fair almost in like year 5.
Mm.
And all my friends around me, they were like very sort of keen on doing the traditional things. So they were building like sort of like anti-slip ladders. They were building like fruit picking gloves. They were building very traditional things that if you googled it online, you could find like a really good like project, and they all got really good scores for it. But like at the time, I was thinking to myself like, these are all fantastic, like creating like streamlined like bodysuits so you swim faster in the water, creating like better ways to essentially collect different herbs as well. But I was like these are all great, but they're not really fixing a problem in my life. So I took this to like the extreme, and I essentially what I did is I went and thought about what's going wrong, like what's happening in my life. And the thing that I realized was that my dad always takes a while to fill up the bathtub. And I was like, okay, so he always sets the bathtub early, and he goes and he leaves it running for a while, and more often than not, it overflows, and there's too much, not overflows, but there's too much water, and like it's water wasted. So for some reason, my silly brain thought that the greatest invention that I could think of was this huge box that would essentially sit in the bathtub, and once the water reached that level, it would send a beeping that would essentially call my dad over to turn the bathtub off. Now, to everyone's surprise, I didn't end up getting a great score for that, but I think it really kind of put into perspective that like I think from early on when I was like really interested in sort of like inventing all that, I always took it from like an aspect where like you can improve like part of your life, or improve like a very small portion, but actually have like a tangible impact. Because a lot of these like sort of inventions that people create as like kids and stuff, and like as they move on, like and they're older, it's not feasible. And like I think luckily as a kid I was able to realize like it's probably more important to create more of a sort of localized impact on the people around you, through your inventions at least, that can actually help. Like my dad's tendency to forget the bathtub was running. And look, it probably saved
Very
him some
entrepreneurially minded.
very yes. That was probably the peak of my sort of inventing career. But it just kind of spurred that memory in me. Just trying to remember like I've always liked like trying to make something new. Like I don't know if you had like projects in school for trying to like you were able to like create something. Obviously my school
Yep.
was probably kind of weird. I didn't have like any robotics or something. So in year 10, I decided to try and make upcycled shoes from plastic bottles.
Fair enough.
But that, to everyone's surprise,
Adidas does that now, Parley or something.
I
I think they
know,
took your gig, mate.
I was actually so upset. I was like in year
Bro,
11.
you're a visionary. Yeah.
I've done this so many times. Those squeezy water bottles that like Nike made?
Yeah.
I actually thought of
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
first. Like I was talking to myself. I was like, what if there's a way where like when you squeeze a particular direction, water can get out? And then look, Nike heard that. It must have been one of the vans driving by, and then they just took it and then didn't give me any royalties. I was so upset. But
It reminds me of a similar story, actually. I remember when I was in first year, I think. This is before I'd started doing software work, like app making work. So it's like the extent of my software was like solving computational problems and not really like writing apps at that point, or like making games. So I didn't really know. But I recall similarly that I wanted people to connect with other people. That's always been like some sort of value in my life. Some of the artistic things that I've pursued has just been solely in the purpose of connecting with people. So I guess I wanted to do something about that, but more from a software perspective. Back in the day when we were all allowed to roam free in the wild and mingle with people without having to be stuck inside, obviously, in first year. This was in 2017, 2018, something like that. I had an idea for an app which basically just showed your location on a map, such that your mates could know where you were, and you could send out a ping, and then they could come to you. About 3 or 4 weeks after that, Snapchat released their feature for Snap Maps.
Snap map.
Yeah.
oh,
So it's just like it's interesting you mentioned that. It's just like sometimes you think of these things and all of a sudden and you're just like, oh, there's no way this can work out. And then all of a sudden it just ends up working out and you're just like, shit. It
yeah,
it just really goes to show that sometimes it's just about it's just about the execution and marketing even more so than the product. There's like absolutely terrible products out there that just do so well and are actually good products just purely for the execution. But the idea in and of itself is kind of shit.
That kind of like outlines, well, like what the whole .com bubble was, right?
Yeah.
It was like people not understanding the tech behind it. So marketing something as like revolutionary allowed people to upscale their companies, their .com companies for, millions of dollars. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
happening
for
again.
sure.
It's gonna happen like with the
Oh
crypto
yeah.
right now, with tokens and
Crypto and
everything.
AI.
Crypto
Yeah.
AI, it's crazy. Like bubbles are
Web
so
3.0. That's it.
yeah, true. But
Hey,
yeah,
we got to cash in on that.
I know. I mean, I
I-
tried. Oh yeah.
I've got a question for you two engineering minds. Reb can go into it because there's an application. See, I come from a bit of an engineering background in the sense that my dad's an engineer. He's now a builder, so he's always been very hands-on. Look at this creation in front of you. That's the purpose of, putting in work and a vocation in essence. Um, you both have these kind of computer sciencey. Reb does come from an engineering background, to my understanding, but you also make music. Now, what I kind of dichotomize in my mind is, making something real and making something abstract. And, what I want to ask Reb, someone who's done the engineering studies, and as we know, is a pretty distinguished musician, is the process, is the satisfaction, is the psychology similar to when you're making something physical as opposed to when you're making something a little more abstract like music? Do you enjoy one more than the other? And have those experiences made you want to go in a certain direction in the future?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Keon. It's because I can probably answer it from the perspective of music. So the thing about music is making music is more about the outcome for it for yourself usually is a feeling, right? It's not necessarily so much of an accomplishment, so to speak. The best music, in my opinion, is the music that you enjoy, right? Musicians should strive to make the music that they want to hear in the world, right? So it's just if you are following that philosophy and you just want to put stuff out there, then you're gonna vibe with your own music. So you can listen to it a few times and be like, I like this. This is really good. Okay. Obviously, there's musicians definitely have a lot more other human. I guess you could call them flaws. Maybe characteristics is a better word. The music is often or their own music is often a way of gaining validation for them as a person at times. So it's a different sort of satisfaction to creating a product or a project. For example, maybe the intersection between that before we go into the pure engineering side of it is maybe making games. Games are pretty abstract, but it's something that people can interact with at the same time. So it's it's a happy medium between like something that isn't real and something that it is real because you do end up writing and pulling stories, but there is a very, very physical implementation, which is the code and the art, right? That have to interact and work in a logical way to have the end goal. So that's also a different sort of accomplishment that comes between the two. And obviously now we'll get to the engineering part of it. The engineering satisfaction is just about solving a problem. Yeah, it's like when something's so stressful, like you have an exam and something, and then you finish it and you're like, oh wow, I did really well on that, and like you get this huge hit of dopamine rush over you and you're like, time to relax, that kind of thing. And I think you were mentioning this before in our conversation. It's just like, when you do something like terrible, like incredibly difficult, and you overcome that, and it just gives you this sense of accomplishment. So it's more that, and it's just like, I don't know if there's specific adjectives that I can use to describe all three of those different scenarios, but if I had to describe the gaming aspect of it, which can be a intersection between the two, it would just be that huge accomplishment of finally finishing something that was difficult, and also some sort of thing where you're connecting with people and also gain some sort of validation from the art or the abstract piece that you've created. So it's just like you also satisfy the feeling of it. Which is not to say that you can't do that with both engineering and music, right? You can also get that kind of stuff because there are very technical pieces of music that you can learn and play, right? Whereas there are also very abstract types of engineering that you can do, especially maybe in more of an architectural kind of field where there isn't necessarily so much utility of it, but it looks very beautiful. So, yeah, that's a very roundabout way of answering your question, I guess. But yeah, that's a very roundabout way of answering your question, I guess. But, yeah, that's a very roundabout way of answering your question, I guess. But, yeah, that's a very roundabout way of answering your question, I guess. But, yeah, that's a very roundabout way of answering your question, I guess. But, yeah, that's a very roundabout way of answering your question, I guess. But, it is
Yeah. I mean,
uh,
that's
it is more about the feeling. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's exactly what like drew. Like, I think draws most people to like these more sort of tangible hard sciences. Is you're right or wrong like most of the time, and you can see that especially with coding. Um, it'll be very apparent if you are wrong. Like, there's no questioning it. But I think what like you kind of brought up an interesting point. Like you brought up earlier that you've kind of sort of touched and dealt with music as well as like with coding and all that. But like now seems like kind of the era of like personal development and sort of upskilling in your own time. And it seems that for you, that's exactly what you did earlier. Going through the process of learning not only just music itself, but like production and like marketing yourself, and then finding like people to collaborate with. And the same with your coding.
Mhm.
So like, I mean, I think we all want to hear kind of your story about how you've walked through your musical journey because it's one that is kind of unparalleled. But just your thoughts as well on like right now, is it like it seems like it's the time where people need to constantly be sort of working on themselves and developing these skills in their free time because what they get through their sort of like the degrees or anything doesn't seem to be satisfactory or to kind of like fill all the gaps.
Yeah, for sure. I think, uh, well, before I start with the journey, I think I should probably preface it by saying that I don't think, I think the most important thing for people to realize or like to figure out is figure out what they want first and foremost, right? I don't think necessarily just working, you can get into this trap or this cycle of like continually self-developing or self-development,
Mm,
aiming to reach a goal, and you can just get locked into that cycle and just not really know. It's just like, yep, I just need to always be improving myself. And it can be really hard because you just the present moment just kind of flies away, and
mm-hmm.
all of a sudden you're just like, oh no, I was just spending all that time improving myself, because it's something that I definitely experienced for the maybe past few years. And I'm kind of coming out of it now that I'm getting a bit older, and realizing that there is much more of a future ahead. So it's just like it's not necessarily a cycle that everyone has to go through. It is the cycle that most go through just because of how education system and like parental and societal expectations have been set up. But it is very important for you to first and foremost know what it is that you want.
Mm,
For me, now I can probably start my journey. So as I mentioned, the very first thing that I wanted, actually, I'll start at the very beginning. So my goals in life haven't really changed ever since I was about three-ish, actually. So the very first thing that I wanted to be in my life was an artist.
mm-hmm.
That's what led to the whole musical thing. The second thing that I wanted to be in my life that I recall was a paleontologist. That's on the backlog for now. We'll get back to that later, right? So
Work in progress.
yes, we'll come back to uni someday and we'll go digging dinosaur bones. Just
Oh,
to fulfill to satisfy my inner child. We'll do that someday. But the third thing that
Thank
I
you for
wanted to
telling
be,
me what that meant. I wouldn't have known.
yeah, no, paleontology. I only
Sounds
know it
so.
because of all the Friends references, but also because I don't
yeah.
know, I was really, I think I've always been really big into dinosaurs. Like, I really
Oh yeah,
enjoyed, like, I think my mom used to say, like, my
dinosaurs are
favorite
sick.
book, I used to walk around with, like, this dinosaur book, and it was like, it was also this show, I can't
Same.
remember, it was like an Australian show where this guy had, like, this little kid had, like, a box of, like, he had, like, dinosaur toys that he carried around with him.
Yeah,
I
I
can't
know what
remember,
you're talking
I
about.
can't remember.
I don't remember the show either.
If I'm doing post editing here, I'll put a picture right here. But yeah, essentially, yeah. There's like that. I used to love that show, and I used to carry around the book with me as well. And then even then, more recently, when I like found out that like Ark Survival Evolved came out, I played that for like a
Yeah,
while. I love that. But yeah. Anyway, continue with your
Ark's a great game.
Ark's so good. We should play it after or sometime.
Absolutely.
I've got to download it. But yeah, definitely yeah. Continue with your paleontology sort of delay hiatus on
Oh yeah.
that.
All right. So that's that. But the third thing that I wanted to be was an inventor or a physicist. Okay. And so I went through that whole stage, so to speak. And that's what carried me through to uni. And when I first started uni, I started doing physics. I went into uni thinking that I was going to do physics and follow the pathway to PhD. But then somewhere along the way, I ended up doing engineering, just because I thought it might be more practical or aligned to the goals of becoming an inventor, I guess. But then I guess I'm at that stage where I was kind of like regretting it because I think physics for me did a lot more than I think actually physics is an interesting thing because physics in a lot of ways is very abstract, right? It is very tangible but very abstract. Mentioning your point before, Keon, so it's like it's also again one of those happy mediums between like having that discovery aspect and like doing something very tangible, and it's a very satisfying feeling. It's almost like prayer in a sense. Um, so I went down that road to just get that inventor tick, and now I'm here. Now I'm doing AI and stuff, and I think we'll get into that later. But that's basically the crux of the story as to why I did the things that I did. Um, but if we go into music just a bit more, it just I wasn't very much into music when I was a child. I was definitely more into my sciences and stuff. But I listened to scores, musical scores in movies, and I was just like, these sound freaking epic, right? You know, like when Hans Zimmer, um, what
Hans
did
Zimmer,
Pirates of the
yeah,
Caribbean?
yeah, yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
course, of
And I,
course.
yeah, and it's just like when when Johnny Depp jumps off the tower and goes swim into the Black Pearl and the theme plays, right? Or
Yeah.
and it's just like you know that feeling you
Have you?
get and you're like, holy
Yeah.
shit, this is epic,
Have you
right?
seen like
And I was just like,
all
how can I
the
create that?
have you seen all the montages which is
Yeah.
like the Black Pearl theme works with everything, and it's like them when
Yeah,
he's
it
doing like
does.
recording, and it does. Like it's Hans Zimmer is
It's a good
incredible.
theme. Yeah.
My
Oh,
music, what's it called? My old music
he's a
teacher,
master.
like classical music teacher, he was also kind of skeptical, like kind of critical of Hans Zimmer because like Hans Zimmer's a bit of a sellout, you know. He's gone for
Yeah.
like these huge productions, but like you can't deny that he's like really reshaped like the way that like music kind of is portrayed in films, and like it's also good because like it's interesting to see like how Hans Zimmer's been influenced by like these really classically trained like artists like Philip Glass, for example. Philip Glass has like some
Of course.
amazing compositions, and that's influenced a lot of like if you look into elements of like Hans Zimmer's Dunkirk, he has a lot of elements there which kind of draw from like Philip Glass's minimalism, or Time even like
Oh,
literally
yeah.
probably the most well known piece of Hans Zimmer's. But yeah, like you're right, it is that definitely probably spurred Microsoft's like soundtrack interest. But yeah, continue, of course.
Oh, no, I completely resonate with that, and I think that was the exact same thing for me. And it's just like I think the only difference from most people is like the first thing when I thought what I thought when I heard that was how can I make this as opposed to like wow, this is really epic. So my brain was just like this is really epic. How can I do this? Right? So I was just like back then it was just I was picking up guitar for the first time, and I think I downloaded a pirated copy of Sibelius, and that
Oh,
was my first foray.
Sibelius. Oh, it's
That was my
cursed.
first
It's
foray
cursed.
into writing.
Wait, you didn't go for
Yeah,
Muse
yeah.
Score? I feel like everyone like when they
Nah,
start they don't know Sibelius, so they always go for like the Muse Score and make their really like shitty
I definitely,
compositions on.
yeah, I definitely Googled it first and foremost. I'm not sure if Musco was around back then. This was like in
True.
2010.
Sibelius would have been terrible back then. Like I can imagine.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
three
But
instruments
yeah,
and they all sound the same.
because like I only knew how to play guitar back then, so it's just like. Oh, also, I should probably mention that I'm a completely self-taught musician. I've never actually had any lessons of any sort.
That's
So
crazy.
that's definitely been
That's
like a
crazy.
journey for me. Yeah. So it's just like, oh yes, self-teaching. We'll get into that in a bit,
Mm.
but that's definitely been one of the things that I've done. Like I definitely taught myself how to do most of the skills that I have these days. Even like coding. I just picked up books and I taught myself how to code when I was like around 10 or 11 or 12, something like that.
Mm. That's crazy. Wait,
Yeah.
what the hell?
Yeah.
Awesome. Fuck no.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's how the musical start journey started, and then I think I got into the whole electronic music scene um, because some friend of mine was in it, and or in it as in like he enjoyed it, and I was like, holy shit, maybe I can try this, and then I did try it, and it was addictive in a way. I was very drawn to the sound design. I was just like,
Mm.
I was I felt very constrained by instruments that already existed, right? So like guitars already had a specific sound, piano already had a specific sound, but it's just like with these electronic instruments, you could start crafting new sounds and new soundscapes. It's just like
Hmm.
stuff that you hadn't heard before. You can make you can make a modular synthesizer that
Yeah,
sounds like bird chirps, yeah,
that
and that
just
can just be
yeah.
one single line, and it's just amazing because not only can you use that to make your own sounds, but you can also layer it up with existing instruments.
Mm,
While that, might be a guitar or a piano or whatever, you can just sample it. You can add all these effects to it. So, for example, a classical instrument, maybe say something like a glockenspiel, right?
mm.
Very cute sound, bing, 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 right? You could just now put that through a whole bunch of layers of filters and it could sound like a completely different instrument. So it still has that organic characteristic, but it sounds so much more abstract. It like there were so many more elements for expressing emotion through these different sorts of soundscapes.
Mm.
So that really drew me into like the whole electronic music scene. And if you guys remember 2010, 2012 was also around the time of the dubstep genre with Skrillex. So those bass designs definitely drew me in a lot. So I got stuck into that. And then yeah, so I did that for a
Okay, so
while.
how old were you around this time, Red? How old were you getting into this new kind of music
12,
scene? It would have been a
13.
kind of turning of age thing. Yeah, cool, cool. So going
Yeah,
into that high
13.
school
Yeah,
environment.
yeah, yeah,
Awesome. So then
sure.
what was the journey like from there? So finding this interest in music and then applying it and actually making stuff of your own and taking it to the places you did. What was that
Yeah,
transition
yeah.
like?
Well, yeah, yeah. So this is the story from this point on, actually. So like we've just
Oh, beautiful.
established the backstory. Uh, now,
Do your thing.
yeah. So I got into that, and it's just like for me, I guess I wasn't a very competitive person in the sense that I didn't want to win things, right? But I wanted my creations to be known. Like that was my way of competing. Like I didn't really care for having a prize for doing XYZ, but it's just like I wanted a prize for making this thing, and I'm like, yes, this is maybe there was like some sort of legacy aspect of it working within me from very early on. It's just like, someone can refer back to this. It's not just something that's going to expire in maybe 40 years and you're just like, oh, back in high school I did this. No, no, it's more like, music's more of a timeless thing. It's just like I can be like, oh, I made this thing, and it still is relevant at some point later on. So I wanted to be really good at what I did. And I guess all of a sudden, I think this is probably one of the places where I started realizing how important people skills were. So I wouldn't say I was necessarily an amazing producer at that time, but I definitely knew how to network, and I learned how to network very early on. So I reached out to well, I got better and better with music, and then I reached out to a specific um, publishing company slash management, and they were very interested. And these guys at that time managed. Do you guys remember Mateo Cruz?
Of
Yes.
course, Dynamite.
Yeah,
Dynamite.
Oh,
Dynamite, and
or
and do
Minecraft's
you remember?
parody TNT.
Yeah, yeah. Well, do you guys remember John Martin? He did the Swedish House Mafia song, "Who's Gonna Save the World?"
Ah, of course, of course.
Yeah. So that management company managed both of those guys, and
Uh-huh.
they were very
Yeah,
interested in me at the time.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So that was like really big for me, but that didn't really end up working out. So we wasted a bit of time there. But then but they introduced me to a lawyer because they wanted me to sign contract. But my parents weren't very supportive of that kind of stuff back then. So that's main reason why it didn't work out. Um, but they sent me to a lawyer, and the lawyer was mostly in like the music industry. So he connected me to a label at the time called Ministry of Sound. The Ministry of Sound is now owned by Sony Music BMG, I think.
that's pretty familiar.
Yeah, they were very big. They were like probably the biggest electronic music indie electronic music label in Australia. But they introduced me to a lawyer because they wanted me to sign contract. But my parents weren't very supportive of that kind of stuff back then. So that's main reason why it didn't work out. Um, but they sent me to a lawyer, and the lawyer was mostly in like the music industry. So he connected me to a label at the time called Ministry of Sound. The Ministry of Sound is now owned by Sony Music BMG, I think.
That's pretty familiar.
Yeah, they were very big. They were like probably the biggest electronic music, indie electronic music label in Australia.
It can be a
So this was
nightclub.
around when I was
Most of the shit
16.
up.
It is a nightclub, I think so. Yeah, it started as a
Oh,
nightclub
okay.
in England in the early 90s
Yep, yep.
that became a music label. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, so that worked out. So it was very exciting to be signed when you're like a 16 or 17-year-old, right? Definitely get all that hype from your mates, right? Especially in the electronic music scene, because like if your mates know that, if your mates were in the electronic music scene in around 2014, I don't remember exactly the year. That was a very big deal because it was a very big label. And after that, I did a remix. Oh, that might have been before actually. I did a remix for a guy named OWS, and the track actually featured Pusha T. So
Wow.
that got signed to Overthrow Records, which was owned by Sony Music also. Um, that was very interesting, and that happened. And then I started going into more of like an indie kind of field, just because this is probably where it started kind of going downhill. Was oh, actually no, I forgot to mention one thing. Sorry, my storytelling is all over the place. I don't even remember all of this because I haven't thought about it in so long. So at that time I actually signed with another manager, and that manager used to manage Demi Lovato, and he also managed like some Grammy nominated artists and stuff. So that was I had signed with that manager at the time. But this is where stuff kind of started getting iffy, and why I started quitting music. When you get into this kind of field, you have a very specific sound that you can stick to. Otherwise, they don't really accept your sound. So I made some tracks and I sent it over to Ministry of Sound a few times over and over, and it's just they kept on being like, why don't we get you a ghost producer that can make music for you and you can be the face and name of it? Just because I don't think this is really the sound that we're going for and stuff like that. I'm like, I loved making music. Like that was the main reason why I made music. Just because I loved it. I didn't care for the fame. Oh, I guess everyone cares about the fame just a little bit, right? I didn't care too much, but like obviously that wasn't the priority. I wanted to be, if I wanted to be famous, then I wanted to be known for my sound and my thing. But they wanted a very specific type of sound, which was very, very much something that I disliked. I didn't like the minimal style of music that was going on in Melbourne at the time.
Mm.
So stuff happened, entered uni, and I signed with some very big indie labels, and then I just kind of stopped making electronic music, and I just haven't been in the game for about the past 3-ish years, I guess. But I think we'll get back into it sometime soon. Yeah, so it's just like in my life, I think I don't necessarily ever stop things, as in like, yep, that was done. I'm never coming back to it. I think I'll definitely be coming back to all of the things that I have previously wanted to do, including paleontology, obviously. It's just, for me, I definitely learnt it in a similar fashion, but the way that I learned it, I've got my keys here. I'll pull it out.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
Came
Bring them out.
prepared. He came.
I have slide out.
Tell us some
My keys
magic.
just slide out like this, so it's just
Wait, what? And you have all the musical props. It's crazy.
yeah.
Wow.
So I've
Oh,
just got that. Can
yeah.
push that back in. But yeah, usually what I
Oh,
do is, I
man.
mean, you can't hear this right now because the MIDI
Yeah,
keyboard is not
MIDI,
connected
of
to
course,
anything.
of course.
But the way that I would do is like I would play chords. I don't actually know how to play piano very well. I usually use this as a composing tool.
Mm.
So I never really learned much technique. But I would definitely play like chords, and I would play intervals over it. So like right now, say that's a D, right?
Mm.
I would play something like an E over it, right? And that'd be a major second, and be like, that's an interesting contrast. So that a major chord over a major second.
Mm.
That's what it sounds like, the interval of it, right? And that is usually how I'd go about like learning it. So it was like a creation process, and it was more of an exploration process. So it's just like what I initially did was exactly the thing that you did, where I memorized intervals, but I realized that it wasn't doing it for me just because it was more of a chore. And I feel like there's definitely ways. I think some people are more inclined to do that, and it's just like they like that accomplishment feeling. It's just like, oh no, uh, now I know intervals and I can memorize intervals, and I know that from that perspective. Whereas like for you and I guess it was more of a case of like, this is really stressful and it's not very fun. I would rather have a practical application or a practical side. Maybe that's where the engineering brain, the picky engineering brain comes in. It's just like, I want to know what this does and I want to explore it kind of deal.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
It's definitely a good point. I think with music, I remember my music teacher telling me specifically, and he was like an established like composer. He'd produced compositions for like international like orchestras and ensembles, and he like wrote the like he wrote the theme song, or kind of like the song that encapsulated Canberra's like centenary, which no one really cares about, but it was pretty cool.
I do.
Oh, thank you. But yeah,
That's pretty cool.
his
Pretty
one
cool.
advice was like, like theory is important. Like obviously, like it's good to like follow like a structure, and, like a recipe, like at times, and create the foundation. But you like as musicians, people who've like listened to music, consumed it, like have played it for most of your lives, you probably know better than anyone what sounds good. And if it sounds
I
good,
think,
that's all that
yeah,
matters.
yeah. That's the end goal of music, honestly. If it sounds good, it sounds good. Now, obviously, the thing about it is like if it sounds good, it sounds good if you're a bit of an experienced musician, because sometimes you'll hear very dismal things
All my
from an inexperienced
compositions.
musician. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think back to like when I used to make music as a kid, and I was like, "Yeah, this is the shit. This is freaking great, right?" And like, and then you listen back to it maybe like 2 months later because I was very obsessed with music. Like when I picked up guitar, and I was teaching myself, so like I didn't have a teacher. I'd maybe practice like 5 hours a day just because I was that into it, right? It takes a lot for an 11-year-old kid to sit down for 5 hours and just like play an instrument or be dedicated to anything for 5 hours a day,
Mm,
right? So I was doing the same thing with like production. I was like probably that was like it consumed most of my life. It really did. Um, More than anything, studies or whatnot. Like I couldn't give two shits about studies when it came to making music.
true.
But luckily, I was a good student, so well,
Good.
like maybe somewhat brainy, so to speak. So I did pull through and did reasonably well at school.
Mm, mm.
Hence why I'm here,
Yeah,
obviously.
I think it's definitely interesting. Like, I had a friend who, he played clarinet with me, and he never really clicked with it. Like, he wasn't incredible at it. His sister was she had like synesthesia, right? So she naturally had a big sort of like an affinity for music, and she like was just really intelligent. Like, she was like topping all her classes in high school, and then year 12 like topped all the classes, got a really good ATAR, and then she wanted to head off and do music. And she
Awesome.
was like in love with music, so she was doing like playing like the flute, and she loved it. But my friend, like, I never thought he was that interested in music because he didn't really like clarinet. But then he picked up like guitar, and that like changed everything for him. He picked up guitar and he really enjoyed it, and then he like joined the like kind of they kind of created this like this spin off like Arctic Monkeys band, and they called it like first it was Antarctic Apes, but then it became the Apes. And so they played a bunch. They played like Franz Ferdinand. They played some the Strokes. They were going to try and do Red Hot Chili Peppers. Didn't work out. But anyway, he found an affinity for like singing and like playing guitar. But then even more, he like fell into this hole of like loving like folk music, and he was like in love with like sort of like Italian music and just general like Australian. Like he loved Paul Kelly, loves Bob Dylan,
Yeah.
and he then learned how to play like the mandolin as well. And so he taught himself how to play the
Nice.
mandolin. And now, like every week, he goes to like, well, when Canberra was in lockdown, he'd go in and he'd play at like the local kind of like pub, and he'd play on his mandolin there, and he'd do like different acts. Like he loved Irish folk, and he would play like Irish folk, like he'd play obviously the Pogues, um, and he'd play that, and then he would have people approach him, being like, "Oh, I really love what you play. Like, I'd love you like join my little band." And there'd be bands playing, and there's such like a nice sense of community where everyone would come watch him. He would perform, like everyone watches music. He would promote his tickets. Everyone come watch it, and like that's someone who like I didn't think would like
Awesome. Yeah.
develop an affinity for it, and he's like kind of like thrown himself straight into like all this folk stuff. Like he's studying classics at ANU. He loves like languages. He like just randomly wanted to learn Italian, so he asked for an Italian tutor when he wasn't even doing Italian. Like he was doing it as like kind of not too seriously at school. He did Italian and fell in love with it, and was like doing Italian every single day, and then became like the best in his class, best everything. And then he fell in love with like history, and he was really obsessed with like sort of like Greek history, and kind of the Caesar period and all that, and Roman history, and was looking into all that. And then he loved it so much that he went and pursued and is like doing his classics degree at ANU, and just absolutely loves it. Is doing like honors classes when he isn't meant to, and it's like that's probably like the best definition of someone who's really does not care about what's expected, what is needed, what is like fruitful in terms of degree or like hobbies, but just follows things through and just does them for his own sake, as Reb was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably the most important thing, right? Like this man, he sounds absolutely brilliant. Like he sounds like he's in love with life, and it's just like that's the state that every human being should be in, right? It's
Yeah.
just like it doesn't matter how brilliant you are at things if you don't if you're not living, and I'm pretty sure that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I'm sure that's an internal feeling that most people know. It's like
Mm,
I'm alive, I feel great, and I'm thriving. If you're not having that, it's just like
yeah.
it doesn't
He's
really
a
matter.
he's a big stoic, so
Yeah,
he
yeah,
definitely understands like he loves all things like philosophy related as well. But
of
he's
course.
all his friends are like he talks about all his friends are like big nihilists, and he's like a stoic,
Yeah.
and he's always clashing heads with them. He's like, how are you guys okay with not doing anything? Like, how are you guys okay with just like indulging in all this like self pleasure and like these desires? But yeah, he's a fun character. But yeah, it's definitely interesting, like the idea of
Well,
how
well,
where they take you, your interests.
yeah. Well, I think that's interesting because I don't think he, nihilism necessarily entails hedonism. I think
Mm,
nihilism can. I think a stoic can be nihilistic, right? A stoic
mm,
is just someone who's accepting of the moment and is just always there
Mm.
in the moment, right?
mm,
Whereas and a nihilist, it's not necessarily a negation to that belief. A nihilist is just someone who thinks there's no intrinsic value of the universe,
mm,
right? Sorry,
mm,
not value, intrinsic purpose of the universe, right? So all they're doing is just saying, hey, I can be whatever I want to be, and I'm therefore okay with being in the present and really enjoying that, which sounds like exactly what he's doing.
mm, mm.
He's not hurting anyone or harming anyone. And whereas like, you know, hedonism is also another way of doing that. If nothing matters, then why wouldn't I go do some coke and fuck hookers, so to speak?
That's the hedonism that comes in. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like
But I don't think one necessarily entails the other, is what I'm trying to
that's
say.
true.
I think
That's
they're
fair.
different, the two philosophies that don't necessarily have an intersection.
Mm, mm, yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like talking about like creativity and like obviously for composing and stuff, like you always need like ideas are sometimes hard to come by, especially when you're forced. I guess in my case it was I had to
Feel them,
produce ideas because I
feel
had
them.
to. But the thing is, like, I actually read about this interesting kind of concept. There's this guy called Julian Shapiro, not Ben's
Hmm.
brother, but he
Not Ben Shapiro.
look, not to be. He's probably my preferred Shapiro to everyone's surprise, but I've got a nice picture of where I look like Ben Shapiro, so I'll put that through as well.
We've
Um,
seen that, I think.
oh, okay, then you have. But yeah, so essentially, Julian Shapiro has coined this term for what he calls a creativity faucet. And the idea of a creativity faucet is you imagine creativity to be like a pipe, which has water passing through it. And we imagine that bad ideas are like wastewater, and they flow through this pipe. Um, but in order to get the pipe sort of cleansed and for creativity to come through, so good ideas, you need the pipe to have all the wastewater come through it before the clear water can come through. So essentially, his philosophy and his kind of term is that you essentially, when you have sort of like writer's block or an issue, the key to it is to sit down and write down all the bad ideas you have and focus on the bad ideas, because essentially what it will is your brain will have pattern matching and it'll identify features of bad ideas, and then in consciously knowing that they're bad ideas, you'll be able to identify them and then avoid them, and then the good ideas
Mm.
come in. And the secret here isn't to just give up and walk away when you've like, oh, I can't come up with like anything good. You just got to persevere with it. And apparently this is like a sort of like a philosophy and like an approach that like Ed Sheeran uses for songwriting, like John Mayer uses for, and like that's how they can produce like
Frank Ocean.
song. Yeah, exactly. Frank Ocean, song after song. Neil Gaiman, the like the sort of writer,
Right up.
can keep producing like incredible stories because he has this
Oh
like
yeah.
sort of like a tailored approach. And I
Stephen King
yeah, exactly. I found it
also
very
mentioned that he does the same thing. Yeah.
interesting. Exactly, exactly. But
That's
Yeah.
interesting. See, I don't know if you guys know. You may. If you guys ever watched Twin Peaks, to know of the director David Lynch.
I
No,
haven't watched Twin
unfortunately not.
Peaks. No.
If not, all good, all good. Yeah, but David Lynch is probably, in my opinion, one of the most creative people to exist.
Mm.
I mean, the guy is just nuts, and he's bloody brilliant, in my modest opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember there's a video of him talking about ideas as almost like, I don't know the exact words, but this phenomena that just exists in your mind, and what you have to, and they just pass through, almost like particles in wind, right? And you just take them as they come, and find what value you can see in them. And I think, well, the reason I'm mentioning this is because, from my memory of his explanation, he doesn't necessarily say ideas are intrinsically good or bad, right? They're just kind of there, and they're there for you to do what you will with them. So while I don't necessarily disagree with what you've said about what Shapiro reckons and how bad ideas come through to make way, and that whole writer's block thing, I feel that, and I think we've all experienced that. I don't know if I could jump on the idea that an idea is inherently good or bad, and it's like, Lynch himself said that you have to take it and play with it and stretch it and apply it to see if it actually works. With that, I do want to ask Reb, because I don't know, I won't presume about Ivan, but Reb does have some awesome experience in making music and testing these ideas. What do you think of that kind of that relationship? Do you think they're inherently good or bad, or do you like what Lynch had to say about just running with them, see what they do?
This is exactly what I was going to talk about. So, like, my personal experience with it. So, first and foremost, actually, I'll get to Ivan's one, and then I'll get to yours. I think,
Sounds good.
For me, the first thing about creativity is it is definitely a quantity game, right? That's what I was saying. It's just like, the first thing is ideas are they're not inherent. They don't come out of nothingness, right? We're all pattern recognizers, and we're all neural networks, right, inside. So we recognize patterns and we put them together to come up with an idea. So the reason why I got into music in the first place, or like into writing, was what I would do is like I would take the chords of something. So like that might be, Hans Zimmer's He's a Pirate, and I would hum over it, and I'd try to come up with my own melodies on top of it. Or what I'd do is like there are already melodies that exist. So, like think about the Pirates of the Caribbean theme, and then I would try to extend that melody with my own, as opposed to actually following through the next line. Okay, and I kept doing that over and over and over again until something. This is where Kian's answer, the thing that you were saying before, might come into play. Until something fit in that inherently wasn't good, but subjectively in that case sounded good to me, right? And I think that's what's most important. And you're just like, yes, I'm a human being, and if I enjoy this experience, there is also a good chance that everyone else in this demographic who also sort of are similar to me might also enjoy this experience, which is why there's a lot of niche music that has a lot of niche characteristics that you might be like, I don't understand, screamo sounds terrible, whereas like some other people might be like, this is really good, this, there's some fry technique to this, or there's some very good airflow technique to this, breathing technique to this, and it really brings out the resonant frequencies that you want for this particular genre to sound good. So it is definitely, I think, Lynch, there is nothing that's inherently good or bad, right? Obviously, a dubstep bass isn't going to sound good in a classical setting to most people that enjoy it. But for some people that enjoy both of them,
that's a challenge accepted. That's got to be a challenge accepted for you.
I've done it before, for sure.
But
yeah.
I loved mixing and making things. So it's just like it was definitely like more of an experimental thing. So it's just I think so. Like I agree with both of those. So it's like, to concretely summarize what both of you are saying, it is more of a quantity game to get better at your craft, and you will find things eventually. It's not like geniuses don't come up with ideas and it just happens to be that. They try a whole bunch of stuff, and then they get better over time at solving those particular problems, if you can call it a musical problem in a sense. Whatever fits better, whatever chord fits better underneath it, whatever progression conveys the emotion better. And it is to answer Kian's thing, it is a subjective thing where we all agree that it is a good sound there, right? Because if you take a jazz musician, and jazz is pretty freaking weird, right? Because it's all about playing the wrong notes at times. That's the chromatic approach to everything. Whereas like it was definitely a very acquired taste to enjoy jazz at first, because at first you're just like, this doesn't make sense. This is just random notes, right? But over time there becomes some order to the chaos. and you start to see the profoundness of it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting that you mentioned jazz because I think the biggest sort of like the hallmark moment that kind of shifted classical and like sort of general classical to jazz was like Stravinsky's push for like introducing jazz and like how he launched like Firebird, which is this like which was like this ballet piece, and it had like elements of jazz, and it was so like critically kind of like acclaimed. Like people were like rioting in the streets because of how just different it was and how much it kind of like shake their views on like what classical music was. And that's kind of the idea of like you have these like paradigm shifts and these things that really shift the music onto the next stage. And like you said, your dubstep with like classical, dubstep with jazz, like that could just be a catalyst for the next sort of era of music. And I think now is where it starts becoming very like sort
Happening.
of
Yeah, it's very exciting.
it's crazy, but it's like music right now that doesn't have like a definition. Like it's all very sort of up in the air and kind of like a cloudy sort of like gray area of limbo of what really defines sound. But like yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
if you've with like considering you do have like an electronic sort of like interest. I don't know if you've listened to any of like Steve Reich's
I've heard.
stuff, but
Yep,
the
I've listened to Varrock.
classic
I've listened to Shostakovich's jazz album is
yeah,
definitely one of my
yeah,
favorites.
yeah.
But yeah, the Firebird suit is
Firebird, yep.
the
Rite of
whole suit.
Spring, the
Yeah,
classic.
yeah, yeah.
But
No,
yeah,
I definitely listened to a lot of classical when I was younger too,
mm, mm,
just because I love to expand my knowledge. And also I was writing scores, so like I would like usually follow along with a score while I'd be listening to something. So like that's kind of like how I also learned to write. So it's like
yeah. I think
I've definitely been exposed to a lot of stuff. Yeah.
yeah. I think obviously you probably also know Giorgio Moroder.
No,
The really he like
no.
pioneered like disco music. He was like the Italian composer who like pushed the era of like electronic and disco. There's a really good
Really?
Daft Punk song like that they made about him. I definitely recommend listening to it.
I probably
Giorgio.
heard his stuff. I'm really
I
bad
think I
with
know the
names.
one.
Yeah.
But you would
So
like
it's just
you
like,
said modular
So
synthesizer, and that's literally like one of the like the key like lyrics which like swells at that point because he took the synthesizer and he like redefined the sound of like techno and disco music, and he
yeah,
like
yeah.
ran with it. So he's definitely a very interesting guy. But yeah, because I remember like the earliest adoptions of like I think the earliest adoption of electronic was I think probably in Japan. I can't remember. And then Steve Reich took it, wrote different trains, wrote music for 18 musicians, all these very, very like different sort of pieces, which kind of like challenged what the view of music is, and all these like inauthentic, like artificial sounding instruments, which would like
Mm.
emulate like human voice and human aspects, and it was
Yeah,
crazy.
of course. Yeah.
But yeah, that was a paradigm shift in music. But to
Oh, for
kind of
sure.
bring it back to our point about I like creating ideas and like good ideas. I don't know. Have you guys heard of this guy called Yoshiro Nakamatsu?
Mm.
No.
Nah, not
Okay,
really.
okay. So you
go
Sounds
have
on. Who
familiar
is it?
though.
so
Was he an
Doctor.
electronic musician?
No. This is completely
Okay.
different. This is in this realm
Okay. Okay.
of just idea creation and the approach to it. So Nakamatsu he prefers to be called Doctor Nakamatsu because he says 8 letters are easier to remember.
Yeah.
But he's a very eccentric character. He's, I think, about like 93 years old right now. He's Japanese inventor, and he is known for having the most patents in the world. He has about, I think, 3.6 thousand plus. Um, and
This is on a
Sounds
great
familiar.
big story,
yeah,
wasn't
great
it?
big story. Yeah.
It was like it may have watched this a while
So
ago. Go on,
yeah.
yeah, go on.
I've recently like rewatched it and did some more research, but he is a very interesting character. He's been inventing for decades now, and he's invented everything from the landing gear to essentially like a self-defense wig to mobile phone, like sort of like cellular.
Self-defense wig, did you say?
Yeah, like a wig that he
That's
throws at
yeah.
people to like defend himself. But he has 3.6K patents. And he has a very interesting approach to things where he has these two different rooms which he uses to sort of spur his ideas. Like he has a rye room. I could be misinterpreting this, but he essentially has a room called the static room, which is where it's completely laced in gold and has like a gold toilet and everything and gold walls. And he sits in there and it's completely like it like sort of prevents like radio frequencies from coming through. And that's where he starts like kind of his ideation process. And he sits there and he thinks about the ideas, and then he has this dynamic room, which essentially is a toilet. He has an obsession with them for some reason, but in an elevator. And the elevator moves, and all it does, the elevator only plays the third movement of Beethoven's Fifth. And he sits there, and that's where he finishes his ideas. But probably the most notable thing about him is he came up with this kind of method that allows him to produce the most ideas. He first invented a waterproof notepad, and then what he does is he goes underwater into his pool, and he thinks, and he thinks, and he thinks, and then he won't rise above the surface until he's come up with an idea. And he says the idea only comes in the 0.05 seconds before death. And he does this every single time. And he's doing it at 93 years old, but he like submerges himself underwater, waits for like the moment to come where he feels like this is the end, and then he has that epiphany and he writes it down in his notepad, and then he floats up and he's fine. But
It's kind of like a live every day like it's your last kind of thing.
oh yeah, he's very like, if you saw him, he has like very
Wow.
eccentric suits. He has like glitter suits. He has like this kind of like he's very sort of like flamboyant, and like he loves life, and he's like for 93 years old, he's very sort of youthful. But that's
Good on him. Wow.
probably, yeah. So I was thinking if like,
I mean, living to 93 is in and of itself a pretty big accomplishment.
yeah, it's
He's
crazy.
definitely above
'Cause he
the
has,
average.
yeah, he has like 3 times as many patents as
Thomas Edison?
a good friend Thomas Edison did. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of people don't really like Thomas Edison, so I don't really.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't have enough
Feel a
Nikola
lot.
Tesla through over, did he?
Yep. That's classic. That's that's definitely a debate for another day. But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's like the idea of like, creative frameworks and like what works, and these idea pipelines is very interesting. In the sense, there's probably a lot of really good structured ways to do it, but also like I think just sometimes I think people just have stronger neural connections and these neural networks where they can come up with ideas more quickly, and they get more stimulus potentially
Sure.
from
Without a doubt.
around them. Like the kind of the only justification I have to not cleaning my table is apparently I've been told that if your table's messy, you're more creative because you have more stimulus to work with and you think outside the box.
We'll disagree with that.
Yeah, my mum kind of like gave me too much confidence in a kid, because I used to play a lot of games, and then I would play like, if you remember like Tap Tap Revenge, like on your phone, and you could like tap and you'd hit the buttons, and then I'd play that in front of my mum, and she's like, "Wow, you're like incredible! Like your reaction speed is so like you have such a good reaction speed. Like it must be because you play games all the time. Like I could never do it. Like I've tried and I could never do it." I was fed this belief that I had an incredible reaction speed my whole life. And then when I did all the ruler tests, I was doing worse than all my friends, and I did the clicking things. And I was like, wait a second, what is this lie? But yeah, look, I'd say gaming probably shaped me in that way, I'd say.
I don't think we could have started with a better or more interesting guest. So thank you, Reb. I mean, the musical insight, the I'm not going to finish the word.
Paleontologist?
All of the insights, from philosophy to music to, the nature of creativity. You've been an absolute pleasure to dissect and poke questions out. So thank you. Thank you for your time. It has been wonderful.
I was going to say, before Reb, before we conclude this, I feel like it'd be wrong if you didn't at least play something on the guitar for us.
You want me to play something?
Look.
Oh, yeah.
It's been there the whole time. I've been tempted to. Just play whatever you like. Oh, he's got another one. Oh my god.
He's got the Fender Strat. Oh.
This is my this is my baby. This is my best friend.
Dude, what a guitar.
This is
so versatile.
Gorgeous.
The sunburst.
First. Yeah.
Okay.
Very nice. Very nice. That is
Love it. It is a custom shop strap too.
Get out.
So I got this.
I wouldn't say you deserve any less. You don't deserve any less.
So this is a 2012 model. So
Demi Lovato signed that one.
Yeah.
It's 9 years old now.
Pusha T touched it.
Let's play some blues today. I feel like I play enough funk. Wait, is this going through an amp or is it like clear or does it sound twangy?
It's a bit
I don't
twangy.
know, but it sounds good.
I could
Really?
not
No.
complain.
I'm gonna turn my amp on. Just give
It
me one
sounds twangy, but look, I can still hear the soul.
I think that's a technique. He's
No,
doing
I
that
know,
kind of.
I know that. I know. Oh,
Does that sound
there.
better?
Okay, that is clear as day.
Is that better?
Oh, it was always good, but continue.
All right, cool. Let's play some blues.